And then I myself and my wife were involved with an undersea mission where we lived in a hyperbaric environment. For me, it was 10 days, and my wife it was 9 days. And that's the NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations, which is a hyperbaric mission where you live in saturation. And if you live in saturation more than 24 hours, you become an aquanaut. So both of us have became aquanauts. Just from our research background, our diving background, we were selected for that mission where we get to train with astronauts. It's part of the astronaut training program.
Oh, wow.
NEMO is. So we get to work with, my crew member, or my commander, Dr. Shell Lindgren, and Samantha Cristoforetti, who's an European Space Agency astronaut. They were just selected to go up in April, I think, to ISS. So they were both NEMO aquanauts with us. So yeah, the hyperbaric stuff has been very interesting. We went, from cells to mitochondria, tissues, animals, different types of animal models, to human clinical trials, to being research subjects ourselves, where we're doing research, on human subjects, where we are the subject in a hyperbaric environment. So that's, although I don't really talk about it that much, hyperbaric research is a big part of what we do. And people know me as the keto guy or ketogenic diet guy, but that's very much interconnected with the hyperbaric world, because ketosis is neuroprotective and has anti-seizure effects.
One of the reasons I want to talk to you about that is because a really close friend of mine just bought a hyperbaric chamber for himself. It's one of those consumer hyperbaric chambers that the ball players use and stuff. And it's supposed to come in this week. And he had to get an actual prescription written to buy it. And it made me curious. I'm like, are there any negative effects to using these hyperbaric chambers? And do you have to regulate yourself, or is it okay to just get in this? Because I plan on using his hyperbaric chamber. Is it okay just to use it whenever you want, or is there risks involved?
Yeah, well, I would highly recommend, getting Hyperbaric Medicine Guidebook, which tells you, so the oxygen is a drug, and if right now we're breathing 20% oxygen, so roughly speaking 20.6%. So, and the rest of it's nitrogen. Really, so most of our breath is actually nitrogen that we're breathing in. A little bit of CO2, a little bit of argon, some gas. So if this room was filled with oxygen, 100% oxygen, and we were kept in here, and you came back 3 days later, we'd be dead. So, and that's not even at hyperbaric pressure, right? So if you replace this room with oxygen, yeah, we would die. We would get something called pulmonary oxygen toxicity. Our lungs would just start blowing up because it's producing oxygen-free radicals, and we would have edema, and we would die a very painful death. So you have to understand oxygen's a very powerful drug, and at hyperbaric pressures, which means we are at 1 atmosphere of oxygen now, when you increase the barometric pressure to 2 atmospheres and then go to 3 atmospheres, that's every atmosphere is 10 meters of seawater, or 33 feet. So if you were to dive down to 10 meters or 33 feet, that would be 2 atmospheres. Another 10 meters, 66 feet, it would be three atmospheres. At that hyperbaric pressure, what happens is the oxygen, your hemoglobin's already saturated, right? But because of the increased barometric pressure, the partial pressure of oxygen would increase, and you actually get more oxygen into the plasma independent of hemoglobin, and that would cause the partial pressure of oxygen in your tissues and your brain to skyrocket, and that produces oxidative stress, and that would kill you if you sustained it for a long period of time. So, which happens in different, military dives and things like that. So you have to adjust the ratio of nitrogen to oxygen, in some cases helium and other breathing gases. So getting back to, you have a hyperbaric chamber. So my question would be, is it a hard shell chamber? Because a hard shell
soft
chamber,
one.
Soft shell. Okay, so a soft shell chamber would really only go to about 1.3 atmospheres. So what that means is it can only basically take you to a quarter of an atmosphere higher than we're at now. So it's probably made out of a polymer, like a Kevlar, even bigger, different ones. So the chances of you hurting yourself, are far less likely. But if you
I'm
were
going
to
to pull up the receipt for it. You keep going.
Okay, yeah. If you were to stay in that hyperbaric chamber for a protracted period of time, then you could potentially, damage your lungs. You're not going to get oxygen toxicity seizures, or CNS oxygen toxicity, which is called, because you need to be essentially at a higher pressure, which would involve a hard shell chamber. So a lot of the work that we do, we have chambers that go to like 60, 70 atmospheres. We have, a lot of what we do is within the military diving operations of about 5 atmospheres and above. And, but yeah, I study the negative effects of hyperbaric oxygen, and that by looking at the various mechanistic things that hyperbaric oxygen does, like, enhances wound healing, it decreases inflammation, it activates stem cells. Most of the people who email me are people who are using hyperbaric oxygen to enhance their athletic performance, to speed recovery. They use it as a nootropic, so oxygen as a drug to increase, growth factors in the brain like BDNF, and research was done to demonstrate, and I think this research was done by a colleague of mine, Dr. Steve Thom, when he was at University of Pennsylvania at the time. He showed that hyperbaric oxygen can increase stem cell production and then the release of stem cells. So there are various drugs that people take to increase stem cell production, or you could use autologous stem cells, and inject them into yourself. Or you could undergo hyperbaric oxygen therapy and actually get your body to coax your body to generating more stem cells. So that can aid. The stem cells tend to get into circulation, and then they hone in on areas that are damaged or inflamed, and then it augments recovery from there.
So it could be internal things as well as external wounds, basically. What you're saying. When you say wound healing, what do you define as like a wound, like a?
Yeah, so there's about 14 different FDA-approved applications for hyperbaric oxygen, and the big one is probably wound healing. So if a facility around here, if you just search, where are hyperbaric chambers around here, they're using it for mostly diabetic wounds, for people who are overweight and they have a wound like on their foot. And that, because many people are overweight or they have diabetes, that impairs blood flow to the area, where a diabetic wound becomes resistant to healing. And when you give hyperbaric oxygen, it hyperoxygenates the wound and reverses hypoxia. So it facilitates it increases the partial pressure of oxygen at the wound site. And by doing so, it increases energy within the wound. So energy production could be down by 90%, like in an ischemic wound. But when you hit it with oxygen, then you're stimulating ATP production, which is like our energy currency, and stimulating metabolism, and the wound can then heal. And then it has, so it's used mostly for wound healing. Gangrene, there are anaerobic bacteria that grow in situations where there's not a lot of oxygen, and you can get an infection, and gas gangrene can kill you. And the only thing that we know that can kill this anaerobic bug is hyperbaric oxygen. It's also used for decompression sickness if you're diving, like even in recreational diving, and you stay down too long and you pop up to the surface, the nitrogen's still in your system and the bubbles are going to want to come out. So it's called the bends underwater if you come up too fast. But decompression sickness will kill you. You can get an air embolism in your lung or your brain. So if someone pops up to the surface too quick because they have some kind of emergency or something, that person needs to go inside a hyperbaric chamber and be slowly decompressed. So the chambers around here, 90% of them are used for wound healing, and then also for diving, for reversing decompression sickness, and carbon monoxide poisoning. If you have carbon monoxide poisoning, a way to save a life is the only way to do it is really with hyperbaric oxygen. So these are some of the applications. And there are many, including for cancer, for like wound healing. If you have radiation, if you're being treated with radiation that causes radiation necrosis, and hyperbaric oxygen can reverse and heal that tissue that has been radiated by radiation. So that becomes a way where patients can conceivably, if they've had radiation therapy, they could get a prescription for hyperbaric oxygen. And the prescription, you mentioned a prescription, that's usually for levels of oxygen that are, above 1.4 atmospheres, like 2 or 2.5 or even 3 atmospheres.
Really?
Yeah, because that would require a hard shell chamber.
Yeah, this is called a respiro.
And do you know
It's this thing right here.
the working pressure of the chamber?
It's
Oh yeah, that is a soft shell chamber.